Check it. Yo, it's E-Dub on the microphone. My style be Electra. I'm the Mel Silrone. Homes walk around.
Alrighty, what up, guys? Today I want to talk to you about common ankle sprains. Now, I'm not saying this is the only reason people can sprain their ankle. There's many reasons, right? But I'm just going to give you one common reason that I see in my clinic. And it's actually more common in females. And it has to do with their overall kinesiology, their bone structure. It's been shown historically that women have a wider pelvis, and they have wider angles in their pelvis, which are called Q angles and things like that. I won't go into that. But the bottom line is it's wider, and it's wider in order to support the fetus, protect the organs, and allow the birth canal to be large enough to actually let the baby out. And men don't have to do that. So the pelvis is historically a little smaller. Now, of course, if you have a 350-pound guy and you have a 150-pound female, it's a little different. But we're talking per that person. Now, what I see, you know, it can go either way. But with ankle sprains, this is what I see the most common thing is. If you see at the beginning of the clip, you see what's called an anterior tilt in the pelvis. Now, this can be dependent of what's going on in the lumbar spine or interdependent, meaning if you have an anterior tilt, you look at that picture at the beginning, if you're looking at your pelvis, it drops this way too much in women greater than 7 to 10 degrees. Well, then you have what's called an anterior tilt. Typically, you see tight psoas muscles, tight quads, tight rectus femoris, and weak lengthened hamstrings and glutes, all right? So this isn't an anatomy lesson, but sometimes you can have that with an increased lordosis in the lumbar spine. You can have it with a decreased lordosis in the lumbar spine. And you can have it with a normal lumbar spine. This has to do with all the other musculature in that area, as well as the fascia and the ligaments. But we're just going to focus on the pelvis. So if you end up with an anterior rotation of the pelvis drops down. It can be because of a tightness, but it also because of a weakness in the pelvic floor, I found, because of episiotomies, gut inflammation, and things like that. What happens is the knees go into what's called the lower extremity pronation. Now, pronation is just not at the feet. A lot of trainers say that. So I'll show you what happens. I'll stand up and show you. What happens is, and this is how the pelvis works, when you drop your pelvis anteriorly, the feet automatically, because the body's connected, go into this lower extremity pronation. It can happen to 1 degree. It can happen to a lot of degrees. It doesn't matter. So lower extremity pronation is when the femur adducts, the tibia internally rotates, the foot externally rotates, or the ankle, and the ankle everts and the foot externally rotates. That's lower extremity pronation of the foot. Same thing on this side. Let's see if you can see it better on this side. That's a lower extremity pronation. Now, let me come back up to the screen. We're always trying to, as humans, decelerate pronation, so we can actually accelerate into supination, which is the exact opposite of that. That's what happens when we walk, when we run, all the time. So it's okay to pronate a little because we're all trying to decelerate it. Well, when you go into that anterior tilt, what happens is the glutes become lengthened and inhibited. Well, the glutes produce hip extension. We'll keep it simple, right? They actually play a part in stabilizing the pelvis because 20% of the fibers attach to the coccyx, which attaches to the pelvic floor. So it is a muscle that has a slight tonic ability to it. But at the same time, it actually decelerates that entire movement, that lower extremity pronation. It helps to slow it down as like a shock absorber, so when you can, when you're running or walking, you can accelerate off into supination. Well, if those muscles aren't working, you can't decelerate supination. So now you end up with common hip ligamentous strain, bursitis. The knee actually jumps from out underneath the patella, so you end up with patella tracking problems. And as Gary Gray says, it's the train tracks that jump from under the train, meaning the knee jumps from under the patella, which can cause chondromalacia, patella tendinitis. It can actually cause chronic ACL tears over and over again, because as you do that and the knee pronates, or the tibia internally rotates and the femur adducts in that motion, you're actually dragging the ACL over a notch in the knee, so you can actually tear your ACL. And then at the same time, you can't decelerate that motion at the ankle and foot, which is that eversion and pronation, and you end up with a common ankle sprain. Now, how does this go with women in wider pelvises? Well, if you look at another picture at the beginning of the clip, I showed you what's called the lateral subsystem. And I know I'm getting technical, but it's really simple. The lateral subsystem is the TFL and the adductors and the glute medius on one side, and the quadratus lumborum on the other side. This is a global system in the body that actually helps to stabilize the body in the frontal plane. Of course, it produces movement. It's a global movement pattern. But it helps to stabilize the body when you walk, when you step up, things like that, so the hips don't shift to the side. So when you step up on something, or you go on one leg, right, when you step up or go on one leg, that subsystem helps prevent this movement. Okay? Now you can see that when people squat. You can see that when people lunge. You can see that when people walk with increased hip hike on one side. You can see it all the time. Well, if you have an anterior tilt, that subsystem is not going to work because you're only as strong as your weakest link. So those systems have to work together to basically stabilize your center of gravity, which is basically right behind the belly button in the pelvis or that torso area over your base of support. The wider your pelvis, right, the smaller your base of support a lot of the times. And if you can't stabilize that center of gravity over your base of support, the second you step on one leg, if your glutes aren't decelerating pronation and this lateral subsystem isn't working, you end up with an ankle sprain. So this is why in women we commonly see ankle sprains. I'll simplify it. It's because they have an anterior tilt, which basically decreases the amount of intrinsic stability they have in the pelvic area. Okay, they can't decelerate that lower extremity pronation when they step, or they step on one leg, right? And at the same time, that lateral subsystem isn't working properly because of that anterior rotation and because of that lower extremity pronation. So what happens is, when they stand on one leg, they can't decelerate that pronation. The hips sway to one side. And when the center of gravity goes over the base, way outside the base of support, you end up with an ankle sprain. And the funny thing is, gait is 85% one leg. And that's why some people that are not conditioned will walk and sprain their ankle all the time. So hopefully you've learned something. It's a little deep, a little quick, but that's, in my opinion, one of the reasons. There's many others, but I'm just giving you one simple reason why we commonly see ankle sprains in women, more in women because of the size of their pelvis, and it's harder to stabilize that wider pelvis over their base of support. Okay, so hopefully you learned something a little bit deep, but that's what I do. So I'll check you later. I gotta go see a client.